Greetings. Welcome to our second presentation of the first week, the construction professional, delivery systems, and scheduling. An understanding of the organizational and legal arrangement of a construction project is, it goes without saying, absolutely necessary to be able to manage job site responsibilities professionally. And if you're completing a degree in construction management, you will of course take classes that dig deeper into this very important topic. But for our purposes, I think a short introduction would be very helpful to this topic of delivery systems and provide you hopefully with a greater appreciation of this complex hierarchy that's imposed over all jobs and within which all decisions have to be made. So we will be discussing the allocation of responsibilities and risks among the major parties that make up a construction project. So who has to do what and who is at risk at which part during this process, essentially. So there are three main teams. We have our design team, which is composed of the architects and the engineers and their consultants. We have a construction team, which could vary, but in general, it's typically we have a general contractor at the top. Below the general contractor are subcontractors, and then, of course, the suppliers who supply our materials. And then finally is, of course, the owner's team, which would have the financiers and the user group, whoever will actually be using the building. So that might or might not be the actual owner, obviously. The project systems, there are three that we're going to be discussing here. The general contracting system, your standard GC or DesignBidBuild option. So this is where our design team completes the design documents and then they go out to bid for all qualified contractors. One is awarded and then it is built. This particular slide discusses these three options relative to fast tracking, which we will be discussing throughout this presentation. So that's the ability to speed up a project, essentially, the ability to overlap. The biggest fast track is overlapping design and construction to get possibly to get tenants in, or an owner wants to get their tenants in quicker. But with this system, our general contracting system, DesignBidBuild, fast tracking is not an option. The design must be complete, then it goes out to bid, then it gets built. So not an option. DesignBuild, however, it is an option. So this is where one entity will provide both, typically one entity would provide both the design and the construction of the building, and fast tracking is an option here. And then the construction management system, so developed in the 1970s, there are two different variations, agency CM and CM at risk. Fast tracking is an option here, and there are a couple of slides explaining this, this kind of hybrid system. So I'm not going to say anything more about that now. Move on. So a couple of important definitions here. So the general contracting structure in general, so a contractor. A construction project is made up of various contracts, just people agreeing to provide services. Architects provide services to owners, engineers provide services to architects. These are just common ones. It doesn't have to be set up in this manner. And then general contractors will provide services to owners, subcontractors to the general contractors, suppliers to whomever's buying their materials. So a great number of contracts, essentially. So the contractor here, number one, a business entity that typically subcontracts all of the work which it is responsible, and with few exceptions does not perform work with employees. So it's an entity that exists that will win an award and hold the contracts, but doesn't actually self-perform any work within its construction company. It just manages contracts. And the actual constructors, definition number two here, are all subcontractors. So that's a whole other set of contracts. So here the constructor is a business entity or individual, with very few exceptions, that does all of the work with its own employees, and with few exceptions does not subcontract work to others. So these are the people that do the actual building. They get their hands dirty. Does not subcontract work to other trade contractors, subcontractors, or subcontractors. These are the people who are actually doing the work. And two more important, little trickier definitions. The first is an agency agreement. So this is a legal contract. I'm going to read the second part here. It binds the principal to latter agreements made by the agent as if the principal had himself personally made the agreements. So essentially, when you set up an agency agreement with someone, you are legally agreeing to let somebody else make decisions for you. All right, and so an owner would do this. An owner would turn over that right to design professionals or construction professionals and let them make decisions for them, essentially. So a very important agreement. When this agreement's not in place, the agreement is actually kind of dictated by business then and by money, as opposed to this this legal contract. Obviously, the money part is also still legally binding, but in other agreements, owners set up the agreements, but the contractors or the designers are really working per the contract, and they get to work in the most profitable way they could. I would say that. Here it's different. Here profit is secondary. They have to put their owners' interests ahead of profit. And then standard of care. This is an important one also. So here, this refers specifically to an architect, but in general, the standard of care. This is, I believe, again, I'm not a lawyer, but I believe this is something that could show up with any profession in a courtroom. So when the issue concerns that an architect or whomever we're discussing shall perform its services consistent with the professional skill and care ordinarily provided by other architects or whomever, other tradesmen or other builders practicing in the same or similar locality under the same or similar circumstances. So if things ever went to court, we would ask, did that professional act the way they should, the way that others in their position would? Okay, so we will be returning to these two terms as we move through this presentation. Okay, so now we're going to go over the next few slides. We're going to run through these different delivery systems. So the first is the most common design bid build. Here we have a visual on it. We have an owner up at the top, and they are holding two different contracts. That's what this pitchfork here means. They hold a contract with the A&E group, so that's the architects and the engineers, and the A&E group might have sub-consultants, but it's all consumed within one big contract that the owner holds here, typically with an architect. There are exceptions, but typically. The owner contracts with the architect, and then all the engineers are sub-consultants of the architects. And then similarly, on the other side, the owner holds a contract with the general contractor, and all the subcontractors are beneath that person or hold contracts with that person. So the owner has to deal with two people, and those two deal with all of the others, essentially. So that's separately hired, yes. The advantage, separate design and construction entities provide useful checks and balances. So these two, if the owner is unsure of an opinion or a matter that is given here, they could go and check in with their construction professional and get a second opinion on the matter. So these two are not working with each other, and they could offer contrary opinions, which is a healthy thing in general. The disadvantage, difficult to integrate construction expertise into design. So a very important disadvantage. So the owner will often just work with the A&E firm to develop the project, and neither the owner nor the A&E will reach out and get construction experience before these documents are done. And projects suffer for that sometimes. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes it could go off without a hitch and be efficient and a great building. But getting that construction advice early on is a very good thing. And a lot of this presentation is built around that idea. All right, next is DesignBuild. So here we have one entity. The owner deals with only one, and it consumes both the A&E group as well as the general contracting group. And there are design build entities out there that are led by both. Commonly, they're led more by general contractors at this point. DesignBuild was a delivery system that came up slowly, and the architects pushed back on it, didn't like it, so the general contractors, they ran with it, and they are reaping the benefits, where architects and engineers are not. Architects and engineers are hired by the general contractor, and the general contractor leads the team. In big design firms, big design build firms, architects and engineers could be in-house, or they could be contracted out to. But it's a great delivery system for some, and yeah, we'll say that. So Advantage allows fuller collaboration. So when this team is all working together towards the same goal and contractually, legally obligated to do so, you could get better results. These two are talking from the start of the project. The disadvantage, lack of independent advocate for design, fewer checks and balances. So here, if the general contractor is leading the team, the owner might only be discussing things with them, and the architect would not be in a position to offer that contrary or, not necessarily contrary, but kind of maybe a differing opinion. Okay, if everything's going through one stream, then we might not hear from the other. Fair to say. So that goes back to the checks and balances issue. And then finally, we have this third piece, the construction management one. So hires a CM as an independent entity to oversee design and construction. So here the owner is bringing in the construction manager early to help oversee this whole process and to get feedback on what the architects and engineers are proposing. The advantage, the independent construction expertise is available throughout. So big advantage right there, very big. Most commonly associated with large-scale complex projects. That makes sense. It's an additional fee, but if the owner needs the expertise, it's well worth it, and it could pay for itself. Okay, so now we're returning to that one. We're going to further discuss this version. So here, going back again, the owner will contract with the architects and engineers, the design team. They will contract with the people that are doing the actual building, but they will have here on their side an expert to confer with. All matters from the beginning of the project through the end. This construction manager is there for guidance. Now we're going to talk about two different variations on how this part could function. So one is called CM agency. All right, so here, and that's the term we just had, an agency agreement. We just referred to that when the construction manager is legally obligated to make decisions, legally allowed to make decisions on the owner's behalf. So the CM, the construction manager, acts solely in the owner's agent, solely as the owner's agent. All right, so they are making decisions for the owner. The fee is based on a percentage of the construction project, so there's really no risk there for the construction manager. The owner deals with contractors and issues contracts to them and pays them, so they're dealing directly with the contractors. This person is not involved in that. And the liability of the construction manager here is similar to the standard of care provision for a design professional. So that's why I brought that definition up. This construction manager should act like all good construction managers that are in that same position, and that's how they are held. That's the standard that they would be held to, essentially. And they're working for a fee, so they are not at risk. Here, however, they are at risk, a different version. So they act as a representative to the owner. Their fee is included in the contract sum. They deal directly with the contractors, and any overruns are absorbed by them. Okay, so it's not a standalone fee. Their fee is part of the whole contract sum, and when things don't go well and there are overruns, they are the ones that are at risk. That's where they are at risk, essentially. So the liability of a CM here is similar to the general contractor with the lump sum, which is the first of the versions, the DesignBidBuild. So here the CM is in a similar situation to the general contractor who is going through the DesignBidBuild. They are awarded the contract to build that project for a certain amount of money, and if things don't go well, that's their risk. Okay, so the CM is at risk, similar to the GC in that scenario. All right, a little more about the agency CM here. So fee-based service. The CM is responsible exclusively to the owner and acts in the owner's interests at every stage of the project. And there is uncolored by conflicting interests. So I guess you could say in an ideal world, everybody would be working in everybody else's interests, but that idealism is, let's just put that kind of aside. Legally, you put somebody's interests before your own when you're obligated to under this situation. Otherwise, if this obligation does not exist, then within as long as you give a normal standard of care, you do what's in your best interest, and you have a profitable job. It should be, of course, it should be built per the design, per the specifications, has to meet code, has to pass inspections. But all that being said, your obligation is a basic standard of care, and then after that, you pursue your own personal interests and have a profitable job. So the matters that the agency CM could weigh in on is everything, essentially. Everything that falls under the whole project management umbrella, all these issues here. This is a common diagram. This one's a little different from others that I've seen. Here it's inserted specifically about agency CMs, but it really pertains to the whole project, or pertains to the project in a bigger manner, I should say. So comprehensive management of every stage of the project, beginning with the original concept and project definition. So that's where it all starts, with the concept and the definition, yields the greatest possible benefits to owners from construction management. So the sooner that CM is involved, the more influential and the more beneficial they could be. However, as time progresses, the CM's ability to affect cost diminishes. All right, so looking at this diagram, again, they've applied it specifically to agency CM, but it's really it's a broader idea than that, and essentially, right across here, the x-axis across the bottom, imagine this is the design conception, this is preliminary design, and then construction begins, and then it closes out, and then occupancy happens. That's essentially what's happening across the bottom here. And what we're essentially looking at is the further the project goes along, the opportunity to improve or to make changes diminishes. All right. This is pointing out, too, that pressure builds to improve the schedule. That is often the case. But the moral of the story, the real important part here is the people who could help you the most if they're on board at the very beginning. As the project moves on and actual construction begins, everybody's ability to influence the project in a positive way diminishes. So big decisions up front are super important, and getting your team, whomever you need, on board early on is critical. All right, and now here the CM at risk, different from the agency. So at risk entails a commitment by the construction manager to deliver the project with a guaranteed maximum price. All right, so the construction management acts as a consultant to the owner in the development and design phases. So early on, they're there to consult during the pre-construction or pre-con services, but kind of changes hats and becomes the general contractor during the construction phase. So this is kind of a hybrid. Good that they're in early for the discussions and for putting their feedback in, and And the purpose of that is to get their expertise to the table right away, and also for them to become comfortable understanding the scope and being able to commit to a guaranteed maximum price. So here, the third bullet points out that when they are bound to that GMP, the most fundamental character of the relationship is changed. So again, this goes back to the agency. Early on, they're a consultant, not quite, I wouldn't say that's quite an agency. They're not really given the right to make decisions, but they are there as a consultant. But then once this part of the puzzle is put in place, then that fundamental character changes, and they, have to provide that standard of care, but then it's in their best interest to have a profitable job, and that's what they are allowed to pursue. In addition to acting in the owner's interest, the CM must manage and control the cost not to exceed that GMP, which would be a financial hit to their company, so they are at risk. Okay, so it's two-sided there. So they move from the consultant capacity into an at-risk capacity. All right, next. Next, we're going to look at the same three delivery methods, but in a slightly different manner. This is not in the book, but it is important. I found this information elsewhere, this kind of different way of looking at it, and I think it's very helpful. So if we look at the 6 essential service elements in a construction project, so in any construction project, these 6 things have to occur. Project management is guidance. So this includes all sorts of tasks, but in general, the way they're defining it here is as guidance. Okay, so it's really nothing more specific than that. It's very broad here. Things that you might expect to be included here are really down at the bottom. Okay, so we're gonna talk, and what's really left is guidance for this element. Design. So this is essentially what the design team does. They understand they come to understand what the owner needs, and they produce construction drawings and specifications to produce the facility that they need. So that's the design. Contracting, again, we talked about this, different from construction, is just the holding of the contracts. Who holds them? That doesn't mean they're necessarily doing the building themselves. They're holding the contracts. The construction, different from the contracting, is the actual hands-on work. Construction administration, this is the servicing of contracts for construction between the owners and constructors. So this is called CA, construction administration, or CA work, and typically architects handle this work. Typically, they don't hold the contracts, but they will help the owner manage the contracts during the construction process. And then finally is construction coordination. So who orchestrates all of the subcontractors, who actually manages that process. Again, doesn't mean they're necessarily doing the building themselves, but who's managing all of the builders. All right, so now we're going to move on. And here is the same 6 responsibilities across the top here in the x-axis. So design, PM, contracting, construction coordination, and construction administration. So here they just flip-flop those two. So here we had administration above coordination. Regardless, not important. So there are the service elements, and here are the 3 delivery systems that we looked at. All right, so we'll start with the top, general contracting. This is our design, bid, build. So design is completed, then it goes out to bid, a bid is awarded, and then it is built. So we see that nice clean break here where we have our design and our guidance is offered by the design team. Then it goes out to bid, and the contracting and the construction and the coordination of it all is all managed by a general contractor, and the CA is, as is typical, this is handled by the design team. So the design team is helping the owner to manage these contracts. They're not holding those contracts, but they're helping the owner manage them. Next is our design build contracting scenario, and here we see design build across the board. DB, design build contractor. We see the owner is involved in the project management part of it, and the owner is also involved in the administration of those contracts, but otherwise the design build entity is really taking care of everything. And then here is the agency CM, where the construction manager moves from guidance into holding a contract, essentially. So here we have the design team involved in the beginning, but the construction manager is here offering guidance during the project management, or for all the project management concerns, I would say. The construction manager is there to offer guidance. The contracting is taken care of by the owner, and then here the construction taken care of by the contractors, and the coordination is again held or managed by that same construction manager. And then here at the end, again, that same construction manager offering guidance along with the A&E group. So a lot more variety down here, a much different animal from the two above it, a little more complex. Again, probably well suited for bigger, complex projects, ones in which the owner needs probably professional owners who have done building before, but they also need that guidance, so they hire that construction manager kind of as that third party. All right, and now we'll flip through a couple of slides very quickly and just discuss these three delivery systems in terms of who does what the best. So providing the lowest cost is the construction management scenario. That construction managers on board early on, they grow comfortable with an understanding of the project, and they provide that GMP, that fee, the fee for building the project, guaranteed max. So this is the best scenario for that. Providing the shortest delivery time. So here is where design build accelerates. So we have those two entities working together and actually beginning the building, beginning the construction before the design is complete is possible. So if the shortest project delivery time is what the owner's after, this is a good option for them. Provides the least potential for conflicts of interest. All right, so here, design build, they're kind of flagging it as having potential for conflicts of interest because all those folks are working under the same entity, and they don't have those checks and balances. They don't have that third party. The owner doesn't have that third party to check in on. Or not even the third party. They don't have the design and the constructors as two separate parties, and to kind of bounce ideas back and get those second opinions. Here it's all under one umbrella. There's probably one go-to person, and you get their opinion, one opinion. Here, however, you have that construction manager on board providing guidance, sitting at the design table early on. So getting those multiple opinions and keeping all those parties separate from one another, essentially. Going back, I'm just going to flip back real quickly right here. Keeping all of these parties working separately from one another, as opposed to handing it all over to one big party. Separate parties, keeping that conflict of interest, the potential for conflict of interest down. And least exposure to dollar risk. All right, so here the owner would contract with only one entity, get one price, and they're going to handle it all. Here there's potential exposure to risk for the owner because the plans were completed, the general contractor accepted the plans, but there could be things missing. There could be items missing which produce change orders. And if that's the case, the owner would be responsible for paying for those misses. All right? The architect is responsible for the mistake or the omission, but the owner would end up picking up the bill for them, essentially. Yes, so we'll leave it at that. Okay, moving on to planning, to scheduling. So, two different types of scheduling that we're going to talk about here. One is sequential and the other is phased. All right, so sequential. Each major project phase begins only after the preceding phase is complete. So here, that's what we were just talking about. We were talking about our first delivery system, and that's kind of what they're illustrating right here. Design happens, it ends, it goes out to bid for a period, it ends, it's awarded, and construction begins. Very clear phases. Start, stop, start, stop. Design is completed before construction begins. Yes, that's what's illustrated there. Sequential construction. Next, we look at phased or fast-track construction. So that's down here. Here we could see design occurring of the different elements, foundations, the superstructure above, the shell and the core. The core is the structure, the shell is what wraps it, the envelope, and the interiors is the third part. So these are the three major components of a design or of a building. So here we have foundations happening. The foundation design is occurring. When that is finished, we can bid out that foundation. When the foundation award is given, we begin the foundation construction. Here, the shell and the core. After major decisions about the foundation have been set in stone, the dimensions of it are set, then we could begin with some confidence in our design of the shell and core. We begin that, we complete the shell and core design, and then that goes out to bid right here. The bid is awarded, and that construction is starting, overlapping. We got the foundation in the ground, shell and core could begin at that point. And then finally, interiors. Interiors are designed. Again, a certain level of comfort has been reached. Certain big decisions are settled on with the shell and the core, so then those interiors could begin. That design's completed, out to bid, and bid is awarded, and construction begins. And all of this that requires significant coordination, all of this produces in this conceptual diagram here, all of this has saved a month and a half and change. So more coordination, but there are significant benefits. So this could be the owner hiring the design build team and saying, I need to get my tenants in there as soon as possible. So whatever downfalls there are to the design build construction, the owner deems it worthwhile. This could be a lot of money for an owner getting tenants into a building. So here we're looking at the same diagram. So some conclusions. Sequential construction is simpler to manage. Yes, obviously that is easier to manage than this. This requires closer coordination. Yes, we understand that between the design and the construction. And it could introduce additional risks if elements built early into the design are in conflict with later decisions. So it takes a sophisticated team. It takes a team that works well together. Something interestingly that I had read about and heard about, of course, over my career is the difficulty when you think of a team. If you think of the owners and the designers and the constructors all as one team, it's very interesting in our business how every project is a whole new team essentially. Or I shouldn't say every, but more often than not, there are new team members for every building design, which is different. When you talk about maybe the airlines, for instance, and people who build airplanes, that is not a new team. The people that design aircrafts and build aircrafts, they all work for the same company. They built the last plane, they built the plane before that, and they designed and built the plane before that. So they learn how to work together. They learn from errors. In our business, more often than not, it's a new designer working with a new contractor, working with a new owner, and it's really a great challenge. And it's what makes this very difficult to do well. And then, yes, so on to the next slide, and we're we're reiterating here that this is naturally suited for design and build, project teams that are working well together and have a record of working well together. That's the best bet for going with this group here. And then finally, just a visual on a Gantt chart, what these schedules essentially look like. So here we have our chores down the y-axis. Here we have dates and times set to them. And then across the y-axis, we have horizontal bars giving a visual depiction of how long these tasks are going to take. And that is the design and construction presentation. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.